And I've been asked to just quickly not let you move, and to introduce Laurent Dubreuil, who's going to make some brief closing remarks. And I believe that Laurent is very much known to all of you. He's a professor of French and comparative literature here. But since this conference is about vantage points and situating your discourse, from my vantage point, of course, his most important role is as editor of Diacritics, which he does extraordinarily well. So, go.
Thank you. And you know, it's a bit, it's very bold from the part of the organizers to ask me to speak now. Not only because I have my doubts about the concept of the South, but also because I might get the impression that I'm the last one to speak, so maybe it's even more dangerous to ask me to conclude that. We heard over the course of those 2 days very different viewpoints and thoughts about very different topics. And the very object of the South has been very heterogeneously defined. The South may even have been conceived by some participants at least as the very locus of the heterogeneous in itself. And so it's impossible to conclude, and I'm not really concluding this symposium, but I'm trying to come up with 3 sets of questions or remarks. And I was talking with Jack earlier, and apparently she has the hope that everybody will stay and will still talk together, and so we'll see, but I'm not too sure about that. So let's say that we have 3 sets of ideas, 3 sets of questions and ideas. Ideas of South. That was the title, wasn't it? Or was our title Ideas of the South, or Ideas from the South, or maybe even Southern Ideas, and we had with Cornell the whole question of Southern theory. In their own talks, our participants had certainly different takes on this, on the title of the conference, even though there is an official title. Ideas of South could invite us to either conceptualize the South as an object or as a topic, and I'm using the term topic with all these etymological sense, or it could invite us to argue for the specificity of something like a Southern process of ideation, or kind of characteristics of ideas coming from the South. Do ideas from the South naturally, politically, psychologically, and or historically differ from ideas coming from the North, or ideas coming from the doppelganger of the North, that is the West? So we are not very good with the points of geography here. The question I just raised might sound like a dubious expression and very antiquated expression of regionalist nostalgia at best, or of racism or historicized chauvinism at worst. Still, I'm under the impression that giving a positive answer to these interrogations and saying, for instance, in more contemporary terms, yes, there is some way of thinking that would be peculiar or unique to the Global South, for instance, that such an answer is far from being a mere relic of the past. And for instance, I did my research 1 hour ago. At Cornell University, as some of you may know, we have a Global South Cultural Project, and on the website of the Global South Cultural Project, the proponents of this GSP, not GPS, explain that, and I'm quoting, "The goal of the Global South Cultural Dialogue Project, initiated by scholars of color at Cornell University together with writers and scholars based in the Third World, is to facilitate conversation among writers and scholars from Africa, Latin America, and Asia, as well as minority groups in the West." End of quote. So here the South, admittedly the Global South, is a mixture of geography, of considerations on the color of the skin of the individuals that partake in the project, and of geopolitical and economical issues at the same time. Facilitating conversation among such Southerners is being presented as a necessary strategy that would counteract the mediation of the West, that's another quote from the website, a mediation that would almost automatically obscure, that's their term, South-South relationships. So if you're a Southern scholar and you speak to another Southern scholar through the mediation of the West, not through the mediation of a Western intellectual, but through any mediation of the West, then your conversation could become obscure. That at least what is being mentioned in that website. So it seems to me that in that particular, but I believe very emblematic example, something like a southern process of ideation is being posited. An idea of what South means is taken as a point of departure to orient oneself. And please remember that the Latin etymology of orient and origin is basically the same. And from there, one derives toward the supposition of some common identity or characteristic. So that's my first set of remarks, and we have this kind of mutual or reciprocal contamination of the object and the subject here. Second set of observations, the ensuing obvious but not trivial problem that we dealt with in the last day and today is linked to the very definition of the South. Definition by this, I mean to the borders or the delimitations of the South. At least if the South is taken as a scholarly tool, and I'm excluding in advance the relevance of any purely descriptive approach that would just happen to favor, say, the Southern Hemisphere, and try to draw any conclusion from that. So at the outset, the emphasis on the South in political, theoretical, literary, historical studies might just seem to grant some new heuristic and organizing power to the geographical or to the conceptual geographical. Since the post-World War II model of area studies is disintegrating or has already vanished, I'm not sure about that, forthcoming Southern studies might prolong a geographical paradigm while putting to the test the alleged unity of the area. But one could also imagine that instead of or above the compartmentalization of the humanities along historical lines and periods, the investment in the conceptual geographical could produce other guiding principles. The difficulty, however, depends on the polar coordinates that you would choose. For instance, why would Haiti, Tunisia, contemporary China, or inhabitants of Saint-Denis nearby Paris be located in the south? As several participants in this conference and many other scholars working on the global south would argue. There, inevitably, the south tends to become a code name for what used to be called the Third World, or for the former colonies, or for the sites of resistance against European American brands of capitalism, or I mean, you can make a long list. And one could wonder why more straightforwardly social, historical, and political categories should be replaced with a seemingly more localizable denomination, the South. I'm sure you understand that I'm not too sure about the value of this substitution. And my third and last, I promised I would be quick, so I will be. Third and last set of remarks and observation. In terms of comparison of the South as a category with other notions that we could think of, like for instance the tropics or tropicalization, or the exotic, or the colonial or post-colonial. You can put post into bracket if you want to refer to something that would be like the decolonial. I don't believe in the decolonial so much, but what do we gain from shying away from concepts such as the ones I've just listed, and one could mention others? What do we gain from re-territorializing our reflection onto the South? Arguably, the category of the post-colonial, with all its weaknesses and limitations, as it has been shaped by the first phase, at least, of its international and scholarly history, came to us through an intense attention to language, langue in fanon, discourse with side, enunciation for baba, etc. The exotic is in structural conjunction with the theoretical role that is often granted to the foreign or to the extraneous in prominent theories of writing and literature. One could think of the strangeness of writing, Xenon in Aristotle, to the Ostranienie of poetry for Shklovsky, etc. And as for tropical, it is never far away from the trope, or from any tropology. And it is no accident that Aimé Césaire named the highly influential journal he created in the 1940s, Tropique. And there is also a book by Srinivas Aranadan that is entitled Tropical Politics, that some of you may know. Would the concept of the South in its turn give us, as humanists, any way of rethinking language or our relationship to language and or to literature? And if we follow Roberto Dainotto, the answer is positive, yes. But I'm not sure that there are many people around you, Roberto, about that. I'm afraid that most often, just as one routinely accepts the historical predetermination of objects, the contemporary scholarly rhetoric of the South could threaten to postulate a fundamentally non-verbal reality of the South, be it historical, political, or geographical, etc., in order then suddenly to transfer it into the discursive real. But since this is, after all, a Roman Studies graduate conference, I think it might be worth our time to consider the relationship of any concept of the South to what is supposed to unite us, at least minimally, that is a care for language, a care for languages, and a care for literature. And on this, I stop. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
10 minutes? Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? I was interested in your side about the decolonial, and I was wondering if you could just elaborate a bit on that in terms of why precisely you don't find it that you
So if I'm elaborating a bit, I won't be precise. So I will be not precise if you allow me to do that, Jeff.
All right.
I would say that in simple terms, I have many points of agreement with at least the impetus or the driving force that is behind the decolonial studies movement. I'm not really sure that you need to go from post-colonial to decolonial. Of course, if by post-colonial we mean that now there is nothing colonial anymore because there is a post, then we need a decolonial. I mean, if you argue in those terms, maybe you might be right to speak about decolonial, but the whole point of post-colonial studies is precisely to go against a sense that the colonial phenomenon would be over. So it seems a strange critique to me to say that post-colonial studies is basically claiming that we turn down the page. So from that, which is kind of one of the main arguments to go to another denomination, the denomination of decolonial studies is being presented as a way of getting rid of some of the sins or mistakes or weaknesses of post-colonial studies. And actually, in the way I approach that corpus, decolonial studies, for me, just reproduce, expand all the difficulties that I can see in the post-colonial studies. So for me, decolonial studies is just a part of it. And I have a complicated relationship to post-colonial studies, as you would guess. But I don't think this is an autonomous field. I don't think it is so much away, so far away from post-colonial studies. I just believe this is the same kind of thing. We can use other terms if we wish, but
I was interested in your comments as well about this because, to me, first of all, like post-colonial, it's not really this homogenous thing, you know, it's Balkan studies and Orientalism. But I think the issue with the post, it's not so much claiming that their, you know, colonialism is over, turn the next page. It's more, it's taking the eradication of like formal colonial administrations as, you know, a significant moment to then theorize after. But the thing with decolonial studies is saying that they may be gone, but still the world is structured in a really like racially hierarchized way.
Which is what many people in post-colonial studies would still argue. Maybe in more, in vaguer terms than what Mignolo would do, for instance. But
right, yeah. And I think some of the decolonial thinkers' critiques of post-colonial is that, there's the Marxist influence and other Eurocentric frameworks that they're working from, post-structuralism, that doesn't quite necessarily fit. It's not necessarily the right paradigm to be using for some of these contexts, like the Caribbean, for example. That's what I work on. If we're working with this framework of post-colonial studies that talks about Europe's othering of these other regions, well, how did Europe even become Europe? It was through the initial colonization of the New World, the Caribbean, Latin America. So I think that these are questions that decolonial studies has a pretty unique stance on that separates it very, very visibly from post-colonial. But again, of course,
I don't think that for 1 second, to be honest. So if you really want my answer on this, I believe it's more like a marketing ploy than anything else. Then there is also the question of the relationship between post-colonial theory, decolonial theory, and colonial theory, and that is a huge problem for both post-colonial and decolonial if we assume that they are completely distinguishable. Because colonial theory is a gigantic corpus, and there are strange lines of convergence between some ideas that have been developed in the European languages of colonial theory throughout the 19th century and before, and some ideas that are being shared in post-colonial studies. So to go beyond that, we would need to really expand the discussion much more. And then maybe we would speak of something else. We would speak of things that may not be working so well with the concepts or the notions of the South, in my opinion. I don't believe that, I'm not a post-colonial scholar. I don't believe that you could reduce that post-colonial studies to the othering, for instance. I believe that if you include Fanon, for instance, as someone who is working within that theory, then things change. So it depends on who you take. If you just want to have your Homi Baba and your Geriatri Spivak, then we are speaking of something. But it depends on how you define these objects.
We can continue separately.
Yeah.
I think there's an issue of positionality, and someone from Europe is having these kinds of critiques. I think there's like an epistemological positioning that still needs to be pushed.
From where I stand, I will say, and I'm not telling you from where I stand, from where I stand, I can tell you that all of those things are not so different, despite all best efforts from proponents of each camp to show the differences. But it depends on where I stand.
We'll continue this.
And
whole question on the South, but the colonialism and post-colonialism, and I basically agree with you. There is not so this opposition or conflict between post-colonial studies and decolonial studies is quite artificial, and in many cases we could find the same contradictions or tensions in the so-called decolonial studies. But it seems to me that the partisans of so-called decolonial studies emphasize a change of focus in post-colonialism from politics to culture, from politics, anti-colonialism as a political practice against colonialism, to post-colonialism as a cultural practice based focusing on as a textual practice. And so post-colonial studies as the construction of a discourse. And this is perhaps an interesting prism in order to analyze this to any extent artificial, but also interesting.
I agree with the idea. That's what I was trying to say also, that at least something with the post-colonial is still from, if we take a certain, some authors that would belong to post-colonial studies, there is still this attention to either enunciation or language or langue, or all of those, or discourse, all of those entities are quite different. But, you know, Anne Stoddard, for instance, would claim that she is a major proponent of post-colonial studies, and she's not so much into studying language or discourse or enunciation. I mean, I remember one conference where we were both participating in, and she was saying, I am interested in bodies, I am interested in bodies. So, okay, she was saying it, but she was interested in bodies. And so the differences that you find are not always so clear, even within that corpus. But of course, it's largely an amorphous corpus, because we are not speaking of a discipline. I mean, post-colonial studies or decolonial studies, none of this is a discipline. It's a group of practices. I mean, it's not exactly constituted the way even history, even philology would be constituted. So you have more tensions or more contradictions or more irreducible differences than even what you would find in terms of the oscillation of paradigms between positivism and not positivism and discursive approaches in history itself. So I was just adding a few things to what you were saying. But I know we're all tired.
Well,
Yeah. I'm not so tired, to be honest.
At the end of your remarks, you mentioned care for language.
Mm-hmm.
And you also said you weren't going to tell us what your standpoint was.
No.
And if we're speaking Greek, the word for standpoint would have been stasis,
Mm-hmm.
which also means insurrection.
Discord, yes.
Yeah, that's my fault, that's all.
So you're just explaining the allegory there. Yeah.
Can I say something else? I don't know. I mean, just to come back to this, it was interesting for me to hear you talk about this colonial, post-colonial, decolonial continuum that we're talking about, because it's something that methodologically has come up in my work as something that's very difficult to distinguish between the colonial and the post-colonial. When you talk about Haiti, for example, is Haiti post-colonial? We don't know. In certain periods, maybe, definitely not in others. So I think that, you know, and for example, I work on Toll Peak with Amy Césaire. Is that a colonial journal? Is that post-colonial? What it precisely is it? I think that what Enzo and Laurent are both saying is that there is this continuum of questioning that can't really be sort of intellectually wrenched in some kind of hard line way without losing what's important about that continuum. But I think that what's interesting about the decolonial, post-colonial problem is that I'm not familiar at all with what decolonial studies are. That's something that I'll have to learn about as someone who is interested in decolonization. But I think that it's that I guess I was stopped by you saying you don't believe in decolonial, when I think it's hard to dispute the fact that decolonization is a practice, whether or not it's a field of study or a discipline.
Yeah, I was speaking about the fields.
Right. So that was the kind of context of my question. But that's just to say that I think that it is in a certain sense a kind of it's a problem of semantics, whereas we want to have these new disciplines, but I think that we can definitely trace a continuum between all of these different distinctions. That's all.
Is it time for me to thank the organizers and
Yeah,
the
we can talk
audience?
more about these things in the whole place.
I think we can put the discussion with the food and the wine.
There's more of it.
Carry on. Just there, next door.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.